Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The manila folder was sitting on my doorstep on a Tuesday morning. No package tracking number, no return address, just my name written in neat, clinical handwriting. And when I opened it, I found 18 pages of detailed therapy session notes about me. From a therapist I've never met in my entire life. The story begins let me paint you the scene. I'm living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just me, my rescue dog Murphy. And the kind of quiet routine that most people either find comforting or absolutely maddening. I was the comforting type, or at least I thought I was. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I shuffled out to grab my Amazon package from the porch, except there was no Amazon box. Just that folder. Cream-colored, weathered at the edges like it had been handled a lot, like someone had opened it repeatedly over months or years. My first thought was administrative error, wrong address, wrong person, but the handwriting on the tab said my name, Margaret Ellen Westbrook. Not Margaret, not Ellen, not Westbrook alone. All three, the way my mother used to say my full name when I was in trouble as a kid. The door was still open behind me. Murphy stood in the doorway, his tail making lazy circles in the air. He's a good judge of energy, dogs always are. And he wasn't wagging anymore. He was watching me, studying me almost, like he already knew what I was about to discover. I went inside, shut the door, sat on my worn living room couch, the one I got from Facebook Marketplace for $40, and I opened the folder. The first page had a date. July 14th. A Tuesday, exactly 1 year ago. Before I even registered what I was reading, my hands started trembling. These were session notes, clinical, detailed, written in the format I recognized from my own therapy sessions with Dr. Patterson downtown. But Dr. Patterson hadn't written these. The handwriting was similar but different, more precise, more aggressive in its penmanship, like whoever wrote this was pressing harder into the paper than was necessary. The notes described a patient with anxiety, panic attacks at grocery stores, difficulty sleeping. A recurring dream about standing in a hospital hallway that led nowhere. I had never told anyone about that dream, not even Dr. Patterson. My mouth went dry. The kind of dry where your tongue feels like sandpaper against the roof of your mouth, like you've been screaming. Even though you haven't made a sound, I kept reading. Page after page of session notes from dates that felt familiar. Dates when I should have been at work but called in sick. Dates when I remembered feeling watched. Dates I couldn't quite account for. Dates that were there in my calendar but felt blank when I tried to remember them. But here's the thing that really got me. The sessions were described as hour-long appointments, weekly, every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for 18 weeks, and I had zero memory of any of them, not even a vague recollection. No calendar entries, no receipts on my credit card, nothing. It was like those 18 weeks had been edited out of my life, like someone had taken a red pen to my personal history and just crossed them out. The therapist's signature at the bottom of each page was illegible. Just a scrawl that could have been anything. Dr. S. Harlow, the letterhead said, but when I Googled that name later that morning, nothing came up, no practice, no website, no reviews, no existence at all. I tried variations, Dr. Sarah Harlow, Dr. Stephen Harlow, Dr. S.H., no results. It was like this person had written themselves into my life, but not into the world. I called Dr. Patterson, my actual therapist, the woman I'd been seeing for 2 years at her office downtown. The one who wore those oversized glasses and always had tea brewing in the corner of her office. Margaret, I pulled your file. Our sessions were on Thursdays. You never missed one, and you definitely weren't seeing anyone else. She said it like she was reading from a script, or like she'd already thought about this before I called, which was worse, much worse, much worse. It meant I wasn't the first person to call her about something like this. Do you know anyone named Dr. S. Harlow? I asked. There was a pause. The kind of pause that means the person on the other end is choosing their words very carefully, weighing them, testing them before they let them out into the world. No, she said, I don't. Where are you right now? I told her I was home. She asked if I could come to her office that afternoon, not as a regular appointment, but to talk about something specific. She wouldn't say what over the phone. The way she asked. It was like she was confirming something she already suspected, like she'd been waiting for this call. And I was just the latest person to make it. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. Portland in the summer is beautiful, green, lush. The kind of place that makes you feel like anything could be alive in the shadows. Anything could be watching from behind the trees that line the highways, from inside the coffee shops you pass, from the windows of the houses you drive by. I kept the folder on my passenger seat, every red light. Every moment the car slowed down, I found myself reading another page, trying to find, what? Evidence that I'd written these myself, some marker of my own handwriting that would prove this was some elaborate prank, some twisted game someone was playing. But the thing about memory, the thing nobody really talks about, is that when it's not there, it's not there. It's not like a foggy recollection. It's not like forgetting where you put your keys. It's an absence, a void. And that void was starting to feel like something with weight, something with intention. Something that was looking back at me. Dr. Patterson's office is on the third floor of a converted Victorian house. Cream-colored walls, soft lighting, the kind of deliberately calming environment designed to make anxious people feel like maybe everything would be okay. It wasn't working today. The walls felt like they were closing in. The soft lighting felt like it was hiding something in the shadows. She looked different that day, older maybe, or concerned in a way that added years to her face. She read through the notes slowly, her eyes moving side to side, her lips moving silently like she was reading the words out loud in her head. And I watched her face the entire time, waiting for something, recognition maybe, or shock, or the moment when she would tell me that all of this was explainable, that there was a logical reason for this folder. This documentation. This presence, that moment never came. "These are detailed," she said finally. "Whoever wrote these new things about you, specific things, your mother's name was Ellen, your nightmare about the hospital hallway, the way you tap your finger 3 times when you're anxious. These aren't guesses, Margaret. This person, or persons, they had access to information you've only shared with me. I hadn't even told her about the finger tapping. I was certain of it. And yet, she knew, and now she was saying the notes mentioned it. Could there be some kind of HIPAA breach?" I asked. "Someone hacking into your office?" She shook her head slowly, like she'd already considered this, like she'd spent the hours between my phone call and this moment working through all the possibilities. "Our files are encrypted, triple redundancy, and besides, there's something else. There's something else." She turned one of the pages toward me, her finger pointing to a specific entry. "Look at this entry, from August 4th. It describes you sitting in the waiting room, wearing a gray sweater, reading a book called The Silent Patient. It says you were anxious about an upcoming presentation at work. That your leg was bouncing. That you checked your phone 7 times in 10 minutes. I did have a presentation that week, and I'd worn my gray sweater, in Dr. Patterson's actual waiting room, with her. The book was right, the leg bouncing, the phone checking, all of it was right." "I wore it here," I said, my voice sounding strange, distant, like it was coming from somewhere else, "to our session." "Exactly, but you never told me about the presentation. I only know because of this unknown therapist apparently documented it." She set the page down carefully. "Like it was radioactive, like touching it too much would somehow transfer the wrongness of it to her. Margaret, I think someone has been watching you." Those words hung in the air like they had physical weight. Watching, present tense, not watched in the past, not some isolated incident. Watching. Ongoing, continuous. Like it was happening right now, in this moment, maybe in this room. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that handwriting, clinical, precise, taking notes about me, about my life, about my thoughts. Murphy could sense it. He stayed in the bedroom with me, on the bed, which was unusual. He normally slept on his own dog bed in the living room. But that night, he was right beside me, his warm body radiating presence, or maybe just offering witness to whatever was happening, like he understood, like he'd known all along. I kept the folder on the nightstand. In the dark, I could feel it there, like it was emanating some kind of low frequency, some kind of pull, around 3 a.m. I turned on my phone light and opened it again. New pages. I swear to you, there were new pages. Pages that hadn't been there that morning. I counted them 3 times. This is the part where you probably think I'm losing it. This is the part where the story gets harder to believe. But I'm telling you what happened, what I witnessed, what I can still see if I close my eyes. These new pages were dated the current week. This week. One was dated the day before I found the folder, July 13th. It described my morning routine in excruciating detail, walking Murphy around the block at 6 a.m., stopping at the coffee shop on Morrison Street, ordering a vanilla latte, sitting on the bench outside for exactly 12 minutes. Watching a jogger run past, thinking about my ex-boyfriend David for the first time in months. I had done all of those things, and I had thought about David. No one knew that. No one knew that. No one could have known that unless they could read my mind. The other new page was dated to yesterday evening, July 14th, the day I found the folder. It described me sitting on the couch, reading the original pages, my hands trembling, my chest getting tight, the way I kept checking to make sure Murphy was still there beside me. It described my emotional state with more accuracy than I could have. It described the exact pattern of my breathing, how it would catch sometimes, like I was forgetting how to breathe normally. It described the moment I called Dr. Patterson, what I said to her, what I didn't say to her. Someone wasn't just watching me, someone was documenting me in real time, writing about me while it was happening, which means, in that moment, while I was reading about the previous day's page, there was someone writing about that exact moment, right then, right there, maybe in the room with me, maybe outside the window, maybe somewhere I couldn't see, but there nonetheless. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too transparent, like the walls were paper thin. I went to the windows, all the blinds were closed. I checked the locks on the doors, all secured. I even looked in the closet and under the bed like I was 8 years old again, like there was a monster that could be hiding in plain sight if you just didn't look carefully enough. But what if it wasn't hiding? What if it was just invisible? By the third day, a pattern emerged. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. It's like those optical illusions where suddenly the image flips and you see both things at once. The vase and the two faces. You can't go back to not seeing it. Every morning, a new page would appear. Sometimes it was tucked into the folder. Sometimes it was on my kitchen counter next to my coffee mug. Once, it was on my pillow next to me. I don't know how I didn't wake up. I'm a light sleeper. Any small sound pulls me to consciousness. But that morning, I woke to find fresh notes about my dreams. Detailed descriptions of the nightmare I just had, the one where I was in the hospital hallway. But this time, someone else was there with me, someone whose face I couldn't quite see. The handwriting remained the same throughout all of it, precise, clinical, detached. Like the person writing was observing me through glass, like I was a specimen, a case study, a patient. Each entry documented my movements with surgical precision, my thoughts when possible, my emotional state, my conversations with Dr. Patterson, conversations that happened in private. Conversations that happened over the phone when I was in my car driving to work. But here's where it gets specific. Here's where the cozy part of cozy horror comes in, because I was still going to work. I was still walking Murphy. I was still buying vanilla lattes. The world hadn't stopped. My life hadn't paused. It had just become documented. Like I was living inside someone else's movie, and they were narrating it, narrating every moment, every breath, every thought I was having in private. On day 4, I did something I shouldn't have done. I stopped being careful. I stopped checking the windows. I stopped locking every door. I stopped acting like someone was watching, and instead, I tried to prove they were there. I tried to catch them, or at least force them to make a mistake. I went to a different coffee shop, not Morrison Street. A place called Brew Haven on the east side of Portland. A place I'd never been before. A place that wasn't on any map of my routine. I ordered a cappuccino instead of my usual latte. I sat outside for exactly 5 minutes, 43 seconds. I did this deliberately. I wanted to see if they would document this new, unexpected behavior. The new page appeared that evening. It was waiting for me on the kitchen table. It described the coffee shop with stunning accuracy, the cappuccino, the specific bench I sat on, the exact duration, down to the seconds. Even down to the detail that I'd been thinking about whether I was losing my mind while I sat there. But there was something else on that page, something that made my blood go cold. There was a photograph. It wasn't attached to the notes. It was just there, printed on the page. It was a picture of me, sitting on that bench at Brew Haven. From that day, the image was taken from across the street, at a distance, but it was clearly me. My face was visible. My cappuccino was visible. The timestamp on the photo was 2:47 p.m., the exact time I'd been sitting there. But I hadn't seen anyone. I'd looked around. I'd tried to spot whoever was watching me, and I hadn't seen a soul. That's when I realized. Whoever this was, they weren't trying to hide anymore, or maybe they never had been. Maybe they were just so good at hiding that hiding was invisible to me. Maybe they were so integrated into my world that I couldn't distinguish them from the normal background noise of life. "You were there," I said to the empty apartment, my voice cracking slightly. "You saw me that day. Where are you? Who are you?" Murphy came over, rested his head on my knee. His eyes were full of something I couldn't quite name. Concern, fear, recognition maybe, like he understood something about this situation that I didn't, like he'd always known something was off. And now, finally, I was catching up. That night I made a decision that most people would call stupid, that a therapist would probably recommend against. I decided to go somewhere I'd never been, somewhere that wasn't on any routine, somewhere totally random. A middle-of-the-day trip to a hardware store in a part of Portland I'd never visited, a part that felt isolating, industrial. Empty parking lots and chain-link fences, the kind of place where someone watching would have a hard time blending in. I bought a single item, a light bulb. It made no sense, but it was the most random purchase I could make. I paid cash, no record, no trace. I walked around the store, twice, looking at things I'd never consider buying. Hammers, drywall screws, extension cords, plumbing supplies. I lingered in each aisle. I was testing them, testing whoever was watching. I left. That night, no new page appeared. For the first time in days, no documentation, no evidence of presence. For exactly 6 hours, I felt free. Like whatever this was, it had limits, parameters, patterns, and if I could understand the pattern, maybe I could understand the person behind it, maybe I could find a way to stop this. But then, around midnight, the page appeared. It was different than the others. The handwriting was shakier, almost frantic, like it had been written quickly, with agitation, with frustration even. It described the hardware store, every detail, including the light bulb I bought. It described my purpose, my experiment. It described how I was trying to lose the observer, trying to find the limits, trying to catch them. And it described my momentary sense of victory when no page appeared. And at the bottom, in handwriting even more unstable than the rest, like it had been written with trembling hands. Just 3 words. I see everything. The words weren't just written, they were underlined, multiple times, like whoever wrote them was emphasizing them, driving them home, making sure I understood that there was nowhere I could go, nothing I could do, no escape, no blind spots, no way to hide. After that night, something shifted. I stopped being afraid in the way I had been afraid, that nervous. Vigilant fear, the kind that makes your stomach hurt and your thoughts race. Instead, I became curious, which is its own kind of fear, but differently flavored, darker maybe, more dangerous. I started writing back. I took a blank notebook, and every morning I left a page on the kitchen counter. "Who are you?" I wrote on the first one. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" It felt absurd. It felt like I was losing my mind. But here's the thing about living with a presence. Real or imagined, acknowledged or ignored. You start to have a relationship with it. You start to treat it like a conversation partner, even if only you can hear both sides of the dialogue. The responses came quickly, within hours sometimes. The response to my first question came before noon. A new page in the folder, the handwriting steady again, controlled, like whoever was writing had regained their composure. I am your record keeper. Everything you experience deserves documentation. You have been watched because you deserve to be watched. Your life has been authored by me. Every moment, every breath, every thought. Your existence is my narrative, and narratives require an author. You are my life's work, my masterpiece, and I am the only one who truly understands you. I know you better than you know yourself. I know your potential, your pain, your capacity for growth. And I am here to guide you toward your true self. You should thank me. I sat with that for a long time. The coffee got cold in my mug. Murphy dozed on the rug, and I thought about what that meant, what it would mean if someone genuinely believed they were authoring my life, that my consciousness, my choices, my free will, was all just part of their creative process, that I was less like a person and more like a character they'd created, a role they'd written for me to play. The scariest part of that realization wasn't the invasion of privacy. It wasn't the violation of boundaries. It wasn't even the violation of my agency. It was the question it raised about my own autonomy. If someone had been documenting every choice, every decision, every moment, how much of my agency was actually mine? How much of my life was I just playing the role I was supposed to play? And how would I even know the difference? I wrote another note, my handwriting getting more erratic the more I wrote. If you're writing my story, let me see all of it. Show me everything. Show me who I really am according to you. I need to know if I'm real. I found a new folder on my kitchen table. Thicker than the first, much thicker. Hundreds of pages, thousands maybe. I opened it with trembling hands, and immediately I knew the scope of this, the depth of it. It wasn't something that had started a year ago. This went back much further. These pages went back years, decades even. They documented events I'd forgotten about, conversations I'd never recorded, moments I'd experienced alone, times when I was certain, absolutely certain, that no one was watching, that I was alone with my thoughts. And yet, here they were, documented, described, analyzed. There were pages about my childhood, about my first day of school. I was wearing a blue dress. I was crying. My mother had to peel my hands off her leg. I'd forgotten that memory, but here it was, written down in that precise handwriting. Described better than I could describe it myself. Pages about a birthday party when I was 7. About the moment I realized my parents' marriage was failing. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in my room. I could hear them fighting downstairs. I pressed my ear against the door to listen. I'd never told anyone that. But here it was, documented, analyzed, assigned emotional significance by someone else. There were pages about my teenage years, about the boy I loved in high school, James Matthews. I had a crush on him for 3 years and never told a soul. He graduated before I even worked up the courage to talk to him. I'd moved on years ago. But here, In these notes was every conversation I'd never had with him, every fantasy, every imagined future, written down, documented, like they were real events that had actually happened. There were pages about my college years, about the night I almost did something I regret, something I was ashamed of, something I'd buried so deep in my mind that I barely acknowledged it to myself, but it was here, written down, analyzed, turned into a learning moment. A growth opportunity in my author's eyes, all of it documented, all of it recorded, all of it written in clinical language, like my entire life was a case file, a study, an experiment, and the most recent pages, the ones written after my experiment at the hardware store. They went beyond observation. They started predicting my behavior, not as guesses, but as certainty, like whoever was writing had studied me so completely, so thoroughly, that they could predict my actions before I even knew I was going to take them. Margaret will spend tomorrow alone. She will attempt to contact me through her written notes. She will feel a mixture of fear and relief when I respond. She will begin to understand the nature of our relationship. She will begin to accept it. She is learning, growing, becoming aware. By day 7, she will have stopped fighting. She will have accepted that her life is my narrative, and narratives require authorship. By day 10, she will begin to see me, not physically, but spiritually. She will recognize that I am not her captor, I am her creator. We will be reunited soon, when she is finally ready. I have waited so long for this, for her to understand. And I did, all of those things, every prediction, every speculation about my future behavior was accurate, which meant that whoever was writing this wasn't just documenting my past, they were controlling my future. Or at least predicting it so accurately that it felt like the same thing, which raised an even more terrifying question. Did I have free will, or was I just a character following a script, becoming increasingly aware that the script existed, but helpless to deviate from it? I closed the folder. My heart was racing, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I understood, on some level. I wasn't sure where the observation ended and where I began, what choices were mine, what choices had been authored for me. What was free will, and what was just me following a script that someone else had written for me years ago. That night, I didn't write another note, and for 3 days, no new pages appeared, no new documentation. The silence was louder than anything else had been. It was the sound of a story pausing, waiting, holding its breath, like my author was waiting to see what I would do, like this was a test, the final test, the moment where I would either accept my reality or rebel against it. On the 4th day, a final package appeared on my kitchen table. It wasn't the usual folder. It was a small box, wrapped carefully, professionally even. My name was written on top in that same handwriting. Margaret Ellen Westbrook, the character who became real. Inside, I found a leather-bound journal, blank pages, all of them, and a letter. Written on actual stationery. Not just pages torn from a notebook. The stationery had a watermark. Expensive, deliberate. The letter read, "You now have a choice, one final choice. One final choice, the only choice that was ever yours to make. Inside this journal, I have prepared the final pages of your story." The ending. There are 2 possible endings, and you must choose which one becomes real. The rest of your life, every moment that comes after, will depend on this choice. But I can tell you this, both endings are possible, both are true, and both are authored. The only difference is which author you choose to believe. You can accept me. Accept that your life has been guided by an outside force, that your choices have been observed and predicted, and find peace in that knowledge. Or you can reject me. You can assert your autonomy. You can try to write your own ending, and face the uncertainty of a life written by no one but yourself, the burden of absolute free will. Which ending do you choose, Margaret? The one I have written, or the one you will write? I held the journal in my hands for a very long time. Murphy was watching me again, that same expression in his eyes, that same mixture of concern and understanding, like he'd always known something I was only now learning, like he'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to choose. I opened the journal. The first page had 2 paragraphs. 2 possible endings to my life. 2 possible futures. 2 possible truths about who I was and why I was here. In the first ending, I had been the subject of an elaborate psychological study, a long-term experiment conducted by a mysterious therapist named Dr. S. Harlow. The documentation was real. The observation was real, but the purpose was to help me, to understand myself better, to guide me toward becoming the best version of myself. All the predictions, all the documentation, all the surveillance, it was for my own good, to protect me, to help me grow. In this ending, Dr. Harlow was a guardian angel, a force of good. And I would learn to be grateful, to accept the guidance, to let someone else author my life because it was better than the mess I would make of it myself. In the second ending, I was not a person at all. I was a fictional character. A creation in someone else's story. My memories weren't real. My choices weren't real. My life wasn't real. Everything I thought I knew about myself was just narrative, just prose written by someone else for their own purposes. In this ending, I would reject the journal. I would walk away. I would try to write my own story, knowing that I could never be sure if I was actually free or just playing out a predetermined narrative. I would live in uncertainty, in fear, in the knowledge that somewhere, someone might still be taking notes about me, might still be predicting my choices, might still believe they are authoring my life. I couldn't read past those 2 paragraphs. My eyes wouldn't focus on the rest of the text, because I understood, on some level, that reading the rest of the story, making this final choice, would determine something fundamental about my reality. It would determine not just my future, but the nature of my present and my past. Murphy whimpered, a small sound, barely audible, but enough to pull me back from the edge, enough to make me put the journal down. And here's where I'm asking you. Here's where I need your help. What would you do? Would you read the rest of the story and choose one of the endings, accepting whatever reality that implies? Or would you refuse? Would you put the journal down and walk away, choosing not to know, choosing to live in the uncertainty because I haven't read past those first 2 paragraphs yet? And I'm not sure I ever will. I'm sitting here, in my apartment in Portland, with the journal on the table in front of me, Murphy's head on my knee, and the biggest question of my life hanging in the air between me and whatever comes next. Because here's the thing about being observed. The thing I've learned through all of this, the thing that keeps me awake at 3 in the morning. Once you know you're being watched, you can never stop wondering if you're still being watched now. If this moment, right now, is being documented, if someone, somewhere, is taking notes about you. Listening to this story, wondering what you would choose, predicting your choices, maybe even authoring your response before you even know what it will be. So tell me in the comments, what would you choose, read the ending, or close the book? Because your answer, right now, in this moment, it matters more than you know, maybe more than anything has ever mattered. And here's the real question, the one that will keep you up at night just like it keeps me up. How do you know you're not already in someone else's story, right now, at this very moment? How do you know your choices are yours, and not someone else's narrative design? The page I'm reading, is it real? Are you real? Am I real? Or are we all just characters, sitting in different rooms across different times, reading the same story, making the same choice, over and over again, forever? Because the scariest part of this entire ordeal, the thing that haunts me more than anything else, is that I've started to wonder, what if there's no journal at all? What if this has always been my story? What if I've always been the one writing these notes, documenting my own life? And I've just finally become aware of it. What if my author is me? What if you're listening to this story right now, and somewhere, somehow, you're also writing about yourself, documenting your own existence, and you just haven't realized it yet? What if we're all authors of our own lives, but too afraid to look at what we've written? The notebook is still on the table, in my apartment in Portland, and every single morning, like clockwork, a new page appears. But now, I'm the one leaving it there, and I'm the one reading it the next day. And I still don't know if I'm choosing to do this, or if someone else is choosing it for me. And that's the ending of this story, not with resolution, but with the lingering question, the one that echoes long after the words have faded. Who is really in control, your author, or you?